the wage earners, the working men, women, and children of the Gilded Age. Working conditions before 1900, not very good. If we're talking about a working class person in a factory type setting, we're talking probably at least 6 days a week and at least 10 hours a day. Very few holidays. You got Christmas off, you got Easter off, and other than that, there were no guarantees and really no vacations for a working class person. There's no 2 weeks off or anything close to that. And it's dangerous. There were little to no safety standards. Safer machines cost more money. Running the machine slower cuts into profits. And with no worker safety laws, the robber barons running industry had no reason to make their factories safer. As a result, accidents were common, in fact, more common than in any other industrial country at the time. For example, 1 out of 26 railroad workers were so badly injured that they needed to leave the job. Even those who weren't severely maimed on the job suffered from chronic illness like black lung disease among coal miners, or from inhaling dust in garment factories, or from exposure to chemicals in other industries. And they endured these hardships despite the really low pay. The average worker earned about $450 a year. Now, at the time, you needed about $600 a year for a family of 4 to live decently. Some jobs were better than others. Construction workers, machinists, government employees, printers, and miners out west did better than your average worker. They made better wages on average. Their conditions were typically a little bit better, or maybe their pay was a little bit better, or they were a little bit safer in their job than your average working class laborer. On the other end of the spectrum, agricultural workers, garment workers, unskilled factory workers, and coal miners back east, those were the jobs that were worse than average. They paid less, they were more dangerous, and or they had worse conditions. For women in the workforce, the number of women entering the workforce from 1870 to 1900 was on the increase, and women worked in most fields. They worked especially in the textile industry, almost dominated by women laborers. Most women who joined the industrial workforce started when they were around 16 years old, and most worked an average of about 6 years, then would get married and then quit to take care of the household and the children. Only about 5% of married women across the country worked. But if we look at minorities, for example, African American married women, 25% of African American women worked. Not because they wanted to, because they had to, because their husbands were earning significantly less than white husbands were earning at their jobs. African American women worked in industries such as agriculture, laundry, and as domestic servants. Women in general worked in clerical jobs. And when we say clerical jobs, we mean jobs like secretaries, bookkeepers. They served as typists or telephone operators, or as clerks in department stores. Some women entered professional jobs like nursing or teaching or serving as librarians. But at the same time, men left these jobs or moved up and took management roles in those institutions, like teacher to principal. As a result, and alongside that change, the status of these professions, nursing, teaching, librarian, the status of these professions diminished. In the rare instances where women and men worked in the same factory, they would be given different jobs, and they'd often be justified as more in line with a woman's role. It also served as a way to justify paying women less because they were never doing exactly the same job as men in the same factory. For children, the number of children entering the workforce from 1870 to 1900 was also rapidly rising. Not because kids wanted to, because their families needed them to. Children 10 to 14 years old often had to work to help their family make ends meet with the bills and rent and food and all the other expenses. Now, we say that children in the workforce were increasing, and that doesn't include anyone over the years of 15 years old or 14 years old. They just weren't considered children if they were 15 or 16 or 17. Boys were paid very little and girls were paid even less. Moving on from children, let's take a look at minorities. African Americans in the industrial workforce were often given the most menial jobs. So maybe like custodian or janitor, the jobs that required or came with the least intellectual stimulation. They were often the last hired and the first fired. And they earned less than their white counterparts at every level of almost every job. The same was true for Asian immigrants out on the West Coast. Japanese immigrants and Chinese immigrants along the Pacific were discriminated against in pay and job hirings, similar to how African Americans were discriminated against. In 1879, the Working Men's Party of California even got the state legislature to outlaw the hiring of Chinese workers. And then the national government in 1882 passed a ban on Chinese immigrants. This lasted for 10 years, but it was renewed after that. And for quite a while, immigration from China will be close to zero. Overall, adults earned more than children. Native-born workers earned more than foreign-born workers. That doesn't mean Native Americans. That means people born in the U.S. earned more than immigrants. Protestants earned more than Catholics and Jews, and that's correlated a little bit with immigration, but also just flat-out discrimination based on religion. White workers earned more than every other race. Men always earned more than women. In fact, women made a little more than half of men's wages.